The restaurant was glowing with golden lights that night. Music played, glasses clinked, and laughter rolled across the room like waves. Everyone's eyes were on her. My daughter, my little girl, now dressed in a shimmering gown that sparkled brighter than the chandeliers above. She had won the lottery, and in a single day, the world had crowned her queen. I stood at the entrance, my chest rising and falling too quickly. My hands shook around a small bouquet of flowers I had bought with coins scraped from the bottom of my pocket. Simple flowers. Nothing like the extravagant gifts piled high on the tables before her. But they were all I could give. My love, wrapped in a bundle of fragile petals. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. For a moment I forgot the noise, the laughter, the music. All I saw was her. My daughter, the child I once carried on my shoulders. The one I fed when I went hungry. The one I sang to when she couldn't sleep. She turned. Our eyes met, and my heart filled with hope. I walked toward her slowly, almost trembling with pride. I imagined her smile, the warmth of her hug, the way she would whisper, "Thank you, Baba, for everything." That's what I thought I would hear. That's what I needed. But when I reached her, when I stretched out my hand, offering her the bouquet like a prayer, she looked at me with eyes colder than ice. She pushed my hand away, hard, as if the flowers were filth. The room went silent. Music stopped in my ears. And then she said it, words so sharp they cut deeper than any blade. "You're nothing to me. Not anymore." The sound of it was louder than the clatter of dropped glasses, louder than the whispers that spread like fire through the crowd. My chest collapsed, in on itself. I felt the weight of 100 eyes burning into me. Strangers who had never known my name now knew me as the man rejected by his own child. I froze. My arm hung in the air, still holding those crushed flowers. My lips trembled, searching for words. But nothing came. I wanted to say, "I'm your father." I wanted to remind her of sleepless nights, of school fees, of the meals I skipped, but my voice was locked inside my chest, smothered by shame. She turned her back to me. Just like that. She laughed again, forcing the music to return, forcing her friends to pretend nothing had happened. But for me, the night was already over. I lowered my hand slowly. The bouquet slipped, petals scattering across the floor. I bent down to pick them up, but stopped. What was the point? My gift, my love, my dignity, all lay crushed beneath expensive heels and careless laughter. With each step I took toward the door, I felt smaller. My shoes scraped against the polished tiles. No one moved. No one spoke. They just watched me leave, like a wounded animal crawling out of the light. When I stepped outside, the night air slapped my face. It was cold, sharp, and it carried the faint scent of rain. I stood there for a moment, staring at the streetlights blurring through my tears. My heart was pounding, but not from anger, from pain. A deep, hollow pain that no words could explain. I walked away slowly, my shoulders heavy, my eyes on the ground. Every sound of celebration from the restaurant pierced me like arrows. I thought of how she used to run into my arms when she was little, shouting "Baba" with a smile that made the world brighter. I thought of how she once promised she would take care of me when I grew old. Now, all of that was gone. I kept walking until the music faded into silence. Until all I could hear was the lonely rhythm of my own footsteps echoing down the street. I passed bright shop windows, but I didn't see them. I passed laughing couples, but I didn't hear them. I was alone. Utterly alone. I stopped at a corner under a flickering lamp. I leaned against the cold wall, and I finally let my tears fall. Not because I was poor. Poverty had been my companion all my life, and I had made peace with it. No, my tears came because the one person I thought would never turn her back on me had done it without hesitation. I whispered into the night, my voice trembling. My own blood, my own child. The words broke something inside me. I stood there until the lamp above buzzed and went dark, leaving me in shadow. I straightened my back, wiped my face with rough hands, and took a deep breath. The cold air filled my lungs, but it couldn't ease the fire burning in my chest. That night, I learned the heaviest weight a father can carry is not poverty, not hunger, not loneliness. It is betrayal. Betrayal from the child you gave everything for. And as I walked into the darkness, I knew this wound would never heal. Not with time, not with money, not with anything. It was a wound carved into my very soul. I lay on the thin mattress in my dim little room, staring at the cracked ceiling. The echo of her voice still stabbed at me. "You're nothing to me." Those words didn't fade with time. They grew louder in the silence, each repetition cutting deeper. My chest felt hollow, yet burning. I turned on my side, closed my eyes, and all I could see was her face as a little girl, smiling with missing teeth, holding my hand as if I were her whole world. I thought back to the years that had shaped me, the years that had carved the lines on my face and the cracks in my hands. I remembered the mornings when I would leave before the sun rose. The streets would still be damp from the night's rain. My shoes, worn thin, let the cold water seep in, but I kept walking, head down, body heavy, toward the factory gates. The air always smelled of iron and oil, sharp and suffocating. I would spend hours bent over machines, sweat dripping down my back, my palms burning from the weight of steel. When the whistle blew, my body begged for rest, but there was no rest for me. I would run across the city to a small warehouse where I carried crates late into the night. My shoulders ached, my knees trembled. But I never complained. Every coin I earned was not for me. It was for her, for my daughter. For the books she needed, the shoes she outgrew, the dreams she wanted to chase. I remembered one night in winter. The cold was so bitter, it froze the water in the pipes. I came home with just enough money to buy bread and a single blanket. I stood in the shop staring at them both, knowing I could only choose one. I bought the blanket. That night, she slept warm, while I curled near the door shivering, clutching my thin shirt to my chest. My body froze, but my heart was full, because she was safe, because she was smiling. There were nights when hunger was my companion. I would serve her the last spoon of lentils, pretending I had already eaten. My stomach groaned in the darkness, but I told myself the pain was temporary. What mattered was seeing her cheeks full, her eyes bright. I thought that was enough, but sacrifice is heavier than it looks. It leaves scars, not the kind you see, but the kind you feel every day. My hands grew calloused and cracked until they looked like old bark. My back bent from carrying too much. My clothes grew older while the children in the neighborhood wore new shirts. I swallowed the humiliation when people whispered about my poverty, when shopkeepers eyed me with suspicion, when neighbors turned away as I came to borrow a few rupees for her school fees. I still remember one of the hardest days. She was in high school. The headmaster told me if I didn't pay by Friday, she would be sent home. I had no money left. None. That afternoon, I went to a man I once worked with. I lowered my head and begged him for a loan. He smirked, looked me up and down, and said, "A beggar like you can't raise a queen." His words burned, but I kept my head low. I walked away with the money. My dignity felt shattered, but when I placed those notes in the headmaster's hand, my chest swelled with pride. She would stay in school. She would not be humiliated. I took the shame upon myself so she would never taste it. Every choice I made was for her future. I told myself that one day she would understand. One day she would look back and see her father not as a poor man, but as a man who gave everything. And yet, standing in that restaurant, when she pushed me away, when she called me nothing, all of those nights of sacrifice came flooding back. Not with pride, with pain. I saw the bread I didn't eat, the blankets I never bought, the tears I wiped in silence. They all stood before me like ghosts, mocking me. What had it all been for? Was I blind to think that love alone would be enough to raise gratitude? I clenched my fists in the dark. My nails dug into my palms, and I stared at my hands. Rough, cracked, broken. These hands had built her life. These hands had carried her through storms. And yet to her, they were worthless. She saw them as dirty. She saw me as nothing. I thought about her first day of school. How small her hands were when she clutched mine. How her eyes lit up when I told her she could be anything she wanted. I worked double shifts that year just to afford her uniform. I walked barefoot for weeks, so she could have shoes. She never knew. I never told her. I wanted her to live with dignity, not with the weight of my struggles. That was my mistake. I shielded her too much. I hid the truth of my sacrifices, thinking love was enough. Maybe if she had seen me broken, she would have valued me whole. The contrast gnawed at me. She sat in a restaurant of gold, surrounded by false friends, while I sat in this dark room, hungry and alone. She raised her glass in laughter, while I raised my hands to cover my tears. She had wealth, but no heart. I had nothing, yet carried love that had cost me everything. My breath grew heavy as these memories poured over me. The silence in the room pressed down like a weight. I whispered into the darkness. Was it all in vain? My voice cracked, but no answer came. Only the sound of my own breathing, rough and tired. I closed my eyes and let the memories play one more time. Carrying her on my back when she was too tired to walk. Selling my old watch so she could join a school trip. Skipping work when she was sick, even though it cost me a day's pay. I had given her my time, my body, my soul, and now, she had erased it all with a single sentence. That night, lying on the thin mattress, I realized poverty never broke me. Hunger never defeated me. Even humiliation never destroyed me. What broke me was her voice. My own blood calling me nothing. And yet, even through the pain, even through the anger, I felt something else stirring inside me. A truth I could not deny. My sacrifices were real. My love was real. And no matter how she spat on it now, no matter how blind she was, those years could not be erased. I whispered to myself, almost like a vow, I am not nothing. I am her father. And one day, she will know the price I paid. The night swallowed my words. But deep inside I knew they would not disappear. They would stay, waiting for the day justice would rise from the ashes of my pain. The mornings grew quieter for me, but louder for her. Every sunrise seemed to bring with it another spectacle from my daughter's new life. I would hear the rumble of an engine outside, the kind of sound you only hear from cars you see in glossy magazines. When I stepped out of my door, there it was, a gleaming luxury car parked right in front of our lane, its body shining like liquid silver under the morning sun. She leaned against it, sunglasses perched on her face, smiling at the neighbors who gathered to watch. Children gawked. Women whispered. Men shook their heads, half envious, half amazed. I stood at the edge of the crowd, invisible. Not one head turned toward me. No one whispered about the years I carried her life on my shoulders. No one remembered my sacrifices. The only story now was her fortune, her shine, her wealth. She threw parties every week. The music would thunder through the night, laughter spilling out into the street. Cars lined the road, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Strangers walked into her house, carrying bottles of wine and expensive gifts. While I sat alone in my room, listening to the noise that used to be her joy with me, I watched through the cracked window as people toasted her name, as if she had achieved something by chance that erased everything I had ever done. My wife, she changed too. She used to sit with me in the evenings, pouring tea into chipped cups, telling me not to lose hope, not to give up on dignity. But now her eyes were elsewhere. She began to spend more time in our daughter's house, helping arrange parties, smiling at guests, wearing clothes our daughter bought her. I could see the shift in her. When she returned home, the smell of perfumes and rich food lingered on her clothes, scents that didn't belong in our modest space. One night she looked at me across the small table and said, "She's offering to buy us a bigger house. Why don't you accept? Why hold on to this life of poverty?" Her words struck me harder than any insult. My wife had stood by me for decades, through hunger, through shame, through storms of debt. But now, money had drawn her toward a world where I had no place. I sipped my tea, cold and bitter, and said nothing. What was there to say? I felt the sting of isolation. My home, once the only place where I could breathe, became heavy with silence. My wife's footsteps grew restless. Her eyes avoided mine. She lived between two worlds, but her heart leaned toward the glittering one. I was left in the shadows, a guest in my own life. Still, I watched. I observed. I noticed the cracks that others were too blinded to see. Her house was full of faces, but none of them carried love. I saw the way her so-called friends clung to her, laughing too loudly at her jokes, praising every step she took. Their eyes not on her, but on her jewelry, her car keys, her purse. Men began circling her like hawks, their smiles polished, their hands too eager to touch her arm. Relatives who had once avoided me now crowded her doorstep with gifts, calling her princess, showering her with blessings they never gave when she had nothing. I remembered their silence when I begged for help with her school fees. I remembered their smirks when I carried sacks of rice on my back while they mocked my torn shoes. Now the same mouths dripped with honey in her presence. I saw it clearly. None of this was real. But she didn't. She drank it in. She bathed in their attention, blind to the greed hiding behind every smile. She looked at me once as I stood near the gate. Watching, her eyes scanned my faded shirt, my cracked sandals. She tilted her chin upward as if even acknowledging me might stain her new world. My own daughter, The child who once begged me to carry her on my shoulders now looked at me as if I were dirt clinging to her shoes. The neighbors noticed too. They didn't speak of me anymore. When I passed by, their conversations hushed, not out of respect, but because their words had nothing to do with me. They spoke only of her, the car, the parties, the wealth. My name vanished from their tongues. I became a shadow walking among them, a man stripped of worth by the very child he had built his life upon. Every humiliation pressed deeper into my bones. Yet I remained silent. My silence was no longer weakness. It was observation. It was patience. I knew storms do not show themselves in the first cloud. They gather quietly, waiting for the right moment. One night, I walked past her house. Music roared from inside, lights spilling out of the windows. I stood in the darkness leaning against the fence, watching as people danced and drank. I saw a man with slick hair, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist. His smile was too wide, too sharp, he whispered in her ear, and she laughed, tilting her head back, blind to the hunger in his eyes. My chest tightened, not with jealousy but with dread. I knew men like him. I had seen them in the factories, in the markets, circling women with nothing but money in their eyes. I walked away slowly, the gravel crunching under my feet, the music fading behind me. The night air was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. But it wasn't the weather, it was the world itself turning cold around me. My daughter's house glowed with light, but to me, it was nothing but darkness. Back in my room, I sat alone, staring at the cracked wall. I thought of the years I carried her dreams, of the sweat that had built her steps, and now she danced on the ruins of my sacrifice. My wife drifted toward her. The neighbors adored her, and I was forgotten. Yet, I didn't break. Not this time. I sat in silence, and I watched. I let the pain settle deep, carving itself into something sharper. My anger no longer burned wildly. It hardened, like steel in fire. Each fake friend, each greedy smile, each humiliating glance from her, all of it became fuel. I whispered to myself in the dark. The world may turn cold, but I will not be buried by it. Let them circle her. Let them drink from her hand. I will watch. I will wait. And when the time comes, truth will strip them all bare. The clock ticked on. The laughter from her house eventually faded, leaving the night in silence again. I closed my eyes, my heart heavy but steady. The world had turned against me, but I knew storms never last forever, and when hers arrived, I would be there. Not as nothing, not as forgotten, but as the father she once tried to erase. The night was long, and the silence pressed against me like a heavy stone. I lay on my back, staring at the cracked ceiling, and for the first time in years, my mind drifted far beyond my daughter. Her betrayal cut deep. Yes, but it also stirred something older, something buried beneath the dust of time. Memories I had forced into silence began to claw their way back. I thought of my youth, a time when my shoulders were strong, my eyes filled with hope. Back then, I believed family was unbreakable, that blood was thicker than anything in this world. I was wrong. I had a brother once, older than me by just a few years. We grew up together in our father's house, playing in the fields, running barefoot down dusty roads, sharing bread when there was barely enough for one. I trusted him with everything. He was my friend, my protector, my blood. But when our father passed away, and the time came to divide what little inheritance was left, that trust became my downfall. I still remember that day vividly. The notary's office smelled of ink and old wood. The papers were spread on the table, and I sat quietly, believing fairness would guide the process. My brother's voice was calm, persuasive, smooth like honey. He spoke of debts, of obligations, of promises our father had supposedly made to him in private. I was young, naive, and too blinded by love for my brother to question his words. By the end of that meeting, the house, the land, everything our father left behind was signed over to him. My name was nowhere on the papers. I walked out with nothing but the clothes on my back and the shame of being cheated by the one I had called brother. I remember standing outside, under the burning sun, the paper in his hand, his smile triumphant, while I stood empty-handed. He didn't look at me as a brother that day. He looked at me as a fool who had been outplayed. I didn't fight him. I didn't raise my voice. I told myself bitterness was poison, that silence was the path of dignity. So I endured. I walked away and built my life from nothing. I carried bricks. I shoveled dirt. I worked like an animal to carve out survival from the bones of poverty. I told myself that patience was strength, that forgiveness was the higher road. And for years, I believed it. I buried the pain of betrayal deep inside and never spoke of it again. Not to friends, not to my wife, not even to myself. I thought that by keeping quiet, I had won, that I was the better man. But now, sitting in this room after my daughter's words shattered me, I realized the truth. Silence had not made me strong. It had made me prey. My brother had stolen my inheritance because I was silent. My daughter humiliated me because I was silent. My wife leaned toward her world because I was silent. Silence did not protect me. It only fed the vultures circling above, teaching them I would never resist. I sat up on the bed, my chest heaving as the old anger mixed with the new. For decades I had swallowed betrayal, convincing myself it was strength. But in this moment I saw it clearly. Endurance without resistance is nothing but surrender. I thought back to my brother's face the last time I saw him. His eyes had no guilt, no regret. He had lived his life comfortably, while I carried the weight of his theft. He must have told himself I was too weak to fight back, too soft to claim what was mine, and in a way, he was right. My daughter's face overlapped with his in my mind. The same arrogance, the same dismissal. History was repeating itself, and I was letting it happen again. No, I whispered into the darkness, my voice low but firm. Not this time. The words surprised me. They didn't sound like mine. They sounded like the voice of a man I had buried long ago. A man who had once believed he deserved better. That man was rising again, clawing his way out of the silence I had buried him in. I walked to the corner of the room and sat on the old wooden chair. The air was cold, but inside me something burned steady. I thought of every sacrifice I had made for her, every humiliation I had endured for love. And now I thought of every smirk, every dismissal, every cruelty she had shown. The parallel struck me like lightning. My brother had stolen my past. My daughter was stealing my present. If I let her, she would steal my future too. I closed my eyes and let the memories of my youth play once more. I saw myself as a boy running through fields, my father's voice calling me to supper. I saw myself as a young man, hopeful, believing in justice, believing in blood, and I saw that moment in the notary's office, the pen scratching across the paper that erased me. I saw the look on my brother's face, the satisfaction, the certainty that I would never fight. Then I opened my eyes and I saw my daughter in her luxury car, surrounded by false friends mocking me with her silence. I clenched my fists. The truth settled deep in my chest, solid as stone. Silence had been my curse, and if I continued it, silence would bury me alive. That night, I made a vow. Not the vow of my youth, the vow to endure, to forgive, to rise above. No, this was different. This was the vow of a man who had finally seen the cost of his silence. I whispered into the empty room. You think I am nothing, but you are wrong. This time, I will not endure. This time, I will answer. The words lingered in the darkness, heavy and sharp. My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from clarity. For the first time in years, I felt a weight. I leaned back in the chair, staring into the shadows, and I thought of the road ahead. I didn't know yet how or when, but I knew this. The silence that had once defined me was broken. I was no longer the man who walked away from betrayal. I was no longer the fool who let his brother steal his life. This time, I would not bow my head. This time, the vultures would choke on the flesh they thought was theirs. And as the night stretched on, I sat in the silence of my room, no longer its prisoner. For the first time in my life, silence was not my cage. It was my weapon, sharp and waiting. The days that followed were heavy, but I no longer carried them the way I once did. The old man inside me, the one who endured in silence, was gone. Something sharper had taken his place. I no longer saw my daughter's wealth as untouchable. I saw it as fragile glass, glittering but ready to shatter, and I would be the hand to crack it. But I didn't move with fury.
No. Fury burns fast and dies out.
I moved with patience. Revenge, I realized, is not fire. It is ice. It creeps slowly, silently, and freezes everything in its path. I started small. I didn't go to her. I went to the people around her. The first were her so-called friends, the ones who crowded her house every evening, sipping her wine, praising her clothes, laughing too loudly at her words. I knew their type, people who love you only when your pockets are full. I had seen them since the first day she won the lottery. One afternoon, I sat in the tea house by the corner, the kind of place where news travels faster than birds. A group of those friends passed by, their expensive perfumes clashing with the smell of cheap cigarettes and chai. I called out softly to one of them, a man with slick hair and restless eyes. He smirked when he saw me, ready to mock. But I didn't flinch. I leaned closer and said in a calm voice, "Be careful with her, she doesn't give without expecting double in return. You think she's your friend? Wait until you owe her, she'll make you pay." I said no more. I returned to my tea, my gaze steady. The man laughed at first, but I saw the flicker in his eyes. Doubt. Doubt is a seed, and I had just planted it. I repeated this in different ways, with different people. I whispered to one that she spoke badly of them behind their back. I hinted to another that she had already chosen who she would discard when her money ran low. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just let my words fall like drops of poison into their ears. And slowly, I saw the change. At her parties, their laughter wasn't as warm. Their smiles weren't as wide. They began to watch her, not adore her. They began to wonder if perhaps she was laughing at them, not with them. Then I turned to the relatives, the same ones who now treated her like royalty. They came to her house with baskets of fruit, with gifts, with praises that dripped like honey. I knew their greed well, and I knew something else. They all owed me. Years ago, when I was still strong and working day and night, I had lent them money in their times of need. Small amounts, perhaps. But debts are debts, and debts have long memories. They had ignored me when I begged for repayment, but I remembered each one. So I visited them quietly. One by one, I stood at their doors, my face calm, my voice steady. "Do you remember the money I lent you? The time I helped you when no one else did? I don't ask for myself now, but my daughter, with all her wealth, surely she expects you to honor your word." Their faces fell. They stammered excuses, promises, lies. But I left them with the weight of my words. And I knew what would happen. They would not go to her with gratitude. They would go to her with guilt. And guilt always poisons. Praise. I didn't stop there, in the marketplace. I spoke to the shopkeepers. In the tea stalls, I spoke to the workers. Always quietly, always gently. I didn't insult her. I didn't rage. I simply told stories. True stories. Of how she had once scorned my torn shoes. Of how she pushed me away when I brought her flowers. Of how she declared me nothing. I didn't have to exaggerate, the truth was enough. Truth, when spoken with pain, becomes heavier than any lie. And the whispers began. I heard them in the streets, people saying she's rich, yes, but arrogant. Look at how she treats her own father. Others muttered, if she can betray the man who raised her, what hope do her friends have? Whispers are stronger than shouts. They seep into ears and stay there. I didn't need to fight her with fists or with fury. I fought her with whispers, and the world began to listen. I watched her carefully during this time. At first she was still radiant, still full of pride, but I noticed small changes. She laughed louder at her parties, as if to drown out something. She bought more jewelry, more dresses, as if trying to shine brighter than the shadows growing around her. And her friends. They still came, but I saw their eyes. They scanned the room more, looking at one another, measuring. When she turned her back, their smiles faded. They whispered, not to her, but about her. My wife noticed the change too. She still spent time in our daughter's house, but she began to return more often, her face tight with unease. One evening, as she stirred tea in silence, I asked softly, "What troubles you?" She shook her head at first, but then sighed. They talk about her behind her back now. Her friends, her relatives. They smile when she looks, but when she turns away, they mock her. I don't like it. I sipped my tea, hiding the flicker of satisfaction in my eyes. People show their true faces when money enters the room, I said. But my wife didn't know that I had guided those whispers, fed them gently, like feeding crumbs to birds. Each move I made was small, invisible to her. She thought her world was unshakable, but I could feel it trembling under her feet. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I didn't need to. My revenge was not in grand gestures. It was in patience, in watching her pedestal crumble piece by piece. I remembered what my brother had done to me years ago, how his betrayal had thrived in my silence. This time my silence was different. It wasn't surrender. It was strategy. I moved through the days quietly, my face calm, my steps steady. But inside I counted each whisper like a coin in my pocket. One by one, they piled up. Until the weight of them was no longer just mine, it was hers. And though she didn't see it yet, though she still laughed in her parties and drove her shining car down the street, I knew the truth. The first blow had already landed. Not against her body, not against her wealth, but against the fragile image she had built. And an image, once cracked, never heals the same. I lay down at night, listening to the faint echoes of her music drifting through the air. But this time, I didn't feel powerless. This time, I smiled in the dark, because I knew the storm had begun. The house glowed that night like a palace. Strings of golden lights ran across the walls, music pounded through the floorboards, and the air was thick with perfume, smoke, and laughter. My daughter stood at the center of it all, dressed in a gown that sparkled with every flash of light. She raised her glass high, and her so-called friends cheered, their voices filling the night. From the outside, it looked like she had everything. The richest girl in the neighborhood, the one everyone wanted to be near. But I watched from the shadows, my hands folded behind my back, my eyes sharp. I didn't see joy in that room. I saw masks. Smiles stretched too wide, laughter pitched too high. People clinging to her not out of love, but out of greed. The party grew wilder as the night deepened. Music thundered, bottles popped, and the floor trembled with dancing feet. I saw men slip envelopes from her purse. Women whisper to each other while their eyes stayed fixed on her jewelry. She didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care. She was drunk on the illusion of admiration. But illusions crack. They always do. It happened suddenly. A knock at the door, sharp and commanding. The music stumbled to a stop. The guests froze, glasses halfway to their lips. My daughter frowned, confused, and went to the door. Two men in dark suits entered, their badges glinting under the chandelier. The police. The room fell silent. One of the officers cleared his throat. "We need to ask about funds connected to fraud. Several names from this house have appeared in our investigation." A ripple of panic swept the crowd. I saw it in their eyes. The very same friends who had been cheering a moment ago now shrank back, their smiles gone. Some quietly slipped toward the door. Others set down their glasses and melted into the shadows, pretending they had nothing to do with her. My daughter's face drained of color. She looked around, desperate for support, for someone, anyone to stand beside her. But there was no one. The ones who had kissed her cheek minutes ago now stepped back, leaving her in the center of the room. I stood at the window, my chest tight. I knew that feeling. The sting of being abandoned in front of others. The humiliation of realizing that those you thought were yours would not stand for you when it mattered. I had felt it in that restaurant, bouquet crushed in my hands, and now she felt it too. She stammered, her voice cracking. This is a mistake, my friend." But when she turned to them, they lowered their heads. A few slipped out the door as the officer spoke again. "Your name has been connected to their accounts. We need answers." Her eyes filled with tears. She reached out, but her hand grasped only air. The crowd that had once worshipped her had vanished like smoke. She was left alone, her glittering dress suddenly heavy, her laughter long gone. The officers questioned her, their voices stern, their words echoing through the hollow silence of the room. She trembled, clutching the edge of the table for balance. She kept glancing at the door as if praying someone would walk back in, someone who would shield her, but no one did. I felt the bitter taste of irony on my tongue. This was the same sting she had once given me. When she pushed me away, when she called me nothing, she left me standing in a room full of strangers with no one to lean on. Now she knew what that loneliness felt like. The silence of abandonment, the humiliation of betrayal. When the officers left, the house was quiet. The music was dead. The light suddenly too bright, revealing the emptiness of the space. She sank onto a chair, her hands shaking, her eyes staring into nothing. The grand party, the glittering show, had ended in a silence so sharp it could cut glass. I watched from the shadows a moment longer. She didn't see me. She didn't see anything. She sat surrounded by empty glasses and abandoned plates. The echo of laughter still clinging to the walls but mocking her now, instead of celebrating her. I turned away and walked into the night. My heart was heavy, but steady. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to act. The world itself was beginning to show her the truth. Her friends were not friends. They were leeches. And when the blood ran dry, they left her cold. As I walked back to my room, the air felt colder, sharper. The same night she once forced me into had now wrapped itself around her. She was alone, just as I had been. And for the first time, I did not feel powerless. For the first time, I felt justice begin to whisper. The morning after her grand party ended in silence. I woke before dawn. The city was still, wrapped in fog. The streets empty except for stray dogs searching for scraps. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the quiet. My daughter's house, just a few streets away, no longer roared with music. It was silent, heavy. I imagined her sitting among empty bottles and broken laughter, realizing for the first time that her world was made of glass. But I knew one night would not be enough. The humiliation she tasted was only the beginning. If she was to learn the truth, if justice was to rise, it had to come from more than chance. It had to come from me. I rose, washed my face in the cracked basin, and dressed in my old clothes. My hands trembled slightly as I tied the knot of my worn scarf. Not from weakness, but from resolve. Today was different. Today I would begin weaving the knot. The first place I went was the small workshop on the edge of town. The smell of metal and oil hit me as soon as I stepped inside. Behind a cluttered desk sat Kareem, an old friend. Older now. His hair gray but his eyes still sharp. Years ago, we had carried crates together, sweating under the same sun. He had become a small-time lawyer, never wealthy but respected by those who knew him. He looked up as I entered, surprise flickering across his face. "It's been years," he said, standing to embrace me. His arms were strong, his grip steady. We sat, and I told him everything. Not with tears, not with anger, but with quiet words that carried weight. I told him of her insult in the restaurant, of the parties, of the police who came knocking at her door. His face hardened as he listened. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "You've carried too much alone. Let me help. I know men in the courts, people who can track where her money flows. If her friends cheat her, we can trace it. If her investments are false, we can expose them." I nodded. I don't want to destroy her. I want her to see, to feel what betrayal tastes like, to understand the weight of it. He placed his hand on mine. "Then we will make her see." I left his office with something I hadn't felt in years. An ally. My next step was quieter. I walked to the marketplace, where I once carried sacks of rice for hours. Under the burning sun, the stalls were busy with voices, colors, smells. I found old Rafik, a neighbor from years past, now running a small stall of spices. His beard was long, his hands stained from saffron and turmeric, but his eyes brightened when he saw me. We spoke as men speak in markets, half in whispers, half in silence between the weighing of goods. I asked him about my daughter. He sighed, shaking his head. "She spends like water," he said. "Buys jewelry she doesn't wear, food she doesn't eat, gifts she doesn't remember. People talk, the shopkeepers laugh behind her back. They say her money won't last the year." I leaned in slightly. "Tell me what they say. Every detail." He nodded, lowering his voice. "I'll keep my ears open. Whatever I hear, you'll know." I placed my hand on his shoulder, gratitude in my eyes. "That's all I ask." With every conversation, the net grew stronger. That evening, I sat in my room, counting the coins in a small wooden box hidden under the floorboard. Years of saving, small amounts tucked away when my family thought I had none. I had denied myself new shoes, new clothes, warm meals, all so I could have this secret. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The next week, I used that money to invest in a small bakery run by a widow on the edge of town. She had always been kind to me, offering bread when I had none. Her business was struggling, but her heart was honest. I gave her the money, and in return, she gave me partnership, small profits, steady and quiet. No one knew. Not my wife. Not my daughter. It wasn't about wealth. It was about strength. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was building. But the net needed more threads. I remembered my cousin Hamid. Once he had come to me in tears, saying my daughter borrowed money from him with promises to repay. She never did. Instead, she mocked him, saying she didn't need to answer to poor relatives. The wound had stayed with him. I visited his home, a small mud brick house on the outskirts. He welcomed me cautiously, but when I spoke of her, his eyes darkened. "She humiliated me," he said bitterly. "In front of my own children, she owes me respect more than money." I placed my hand on his knee. Then stand with me. We won't fight her with anger. We'll fight her with truth. Together. His jaw tightened, but then he nodded. If it means she learns humility, I'm with you. And so the net widened. A lawyer who could trace her lies. A neighbor who would feed me whispers. A relative who carried his own wound. Piece by piece, I was surrounding her. She didn't see it. She still drove her luxury car down the street. Still laughed too loudly with her friends. Still threw parties with music loud enough to shake the walls. But beneath the noise, the threads were tightening. At night, I sat in silence, listening to the distant hum of her life. My wife still spent time at her house, her eyes shining with the reflection of wealth. But when she returned, she carried unease. She told me of small arguments, of friends who had begun fighting over favors, of men who demanded more than they gave. I listened quietly, nodding, my mind marking every detail. The net was working, but I didn't rush. Revenge is not taken in one blow. It is taken in patience, in silence, in the slow tightening of the threads until the prey no longer has room to move. And so I waited for the cracks to widen, for the masks to slip, for her world to lean just enough for me to pull the rope. The father who once endured in silence was gone. In his place stood a man who had learned that silence could be a weapon, and patience could be a blade. And though she did not know it, though she still looked at me as nothing, I was already weaving the lines of her downfall. Money makes a sound when it moves. Not just the rustle of bills or the click of card machines. It hums in the air. It changes how people walk, how they speak, how they smile. I could hear that sound around my daughter everywhere she went. It followed her like a song that promised she would always be adored, always be right, always be safe. I knew better. Songs end. And some songs end mid-note. I kept my distance. I stayed in my small room. I drank my tea in silence. I nodded at the neighbors and let them forget me. I wanted her to believe what she already believed, that I was weak, that I was finished, that I had nothing left but air in my pockets and regret in my eyes. My silence fed her pride, and pride is the easiest thing to tip over. The first crack came with property. She wanted to be a queen with land. She wanted gates and guards and a view from every window. A man with gleaming shoes and a watch that flashed like a mirror found her. He spoke softly. He said words like hot deal, pre-launch, exclusive registry. He showed her glossy brochures with palm trees and white fences. He showed her photos that were not from this city, not even from this country. But she didn't notice. The paper was thick. The ink was rich. I knew the broker. Everyone in the old market knew him. He had once tried to sell my cousin a shop that already belonged to someone else. Kareem, my friend-in-law, had a file on him so fat it could stop a door. I did not warn her. I let her drive to the fake site in her shining car. I let her step out with her hair done and her perfume bright and her pen ready. I sat on the low wall across the road. An old man eating a piece of bread, invisible. When she handed over the down payment, I turned my head and watched a crow hop along the curb. Sometimes the world teaches better than fathers do. The paper she received that day looked beautiful. Ribbons, stamps, seals that gleamed under the light. But beauty on paper does not stop water from leaking through a roof. Weeks later, when she tried to visit her plot, there was no gate, no fence, no palm tree. Not even a signboard with the developer's name. Just uneven earth and stray dogs sleeping in the dust. She shouted into her phone. The man with the watch was suddenly out of the country. His number changed. His office moved. The brochure curled at the edges like a dry leaf. She told no one the full story. But I heard it all. Rafiq at the spice stall told me her driver bought strong tea 3 times in a row and spilled half of it on the street. Hands shaking. My wife returned late that night, quiet as a closed door. I did not ask her anything. I folded my blanket. I polished my old shoes. I waited. The second crack came with an investment. A friend of a friend promised her a seat at a table where money multiplies overnight. They met at a shiny cafe with chairs too small and music too loud. He was smooth, that one. He spoke of digital assets and whale signals. He moved graphs with his fingers and smiled when lines went up. I watched from the sidewalk outside, reflected in the glass. I could see her nod, her chin lifted the way it always lifted when she felt important. Querim did not need to tell me this kind of table eats the people it invites. I had already asked him to keep an eye on new companies registered in our area with names that looked like real words, but were not. 3 showed up that week. All shared directors with long histories of opening and closing and leaving smoke behind. I did not knock on my daughter's door to warn her. I let her transfer the money. I let her log in and stare at a dashboard with numbers that danced like fireflies. And then, one morning, when she checked again, the screen showed maintenance. The day after that, the site was unavailable. By the end of the week, the link led nowhere. Her laughter became louder at parties after that. Not real laughter, the kind you pour over fear, like perfume. She bought a diamond bracelet, the size of a small chain, heavy enough to bruise her wrist, so the room would look at that instead of the crack in her smile. People did look. People always look at light. But I saw the bruise. The third crack was not paper or screens. It had a face. A man with a gentle voice and eyes that practiced looking sincere. Found her. I had seen him before in a different neighborhood leaning against a pharmacy window, smiling at a woman who held her purse too close. Men like him count feelings for a living. He told my daughter she worked too hard carrying other people's lives. He said she needed a partner who could build a future with her. He brought flowers, not from a roadside vendor, but from a place that wrapped them in white tissue and sprayed them with something sweet. He kissed her wrist near the bruise where the bracelet had rubbed her skin. She showed him the world she had made. He showed her a world he never would. He did not ask for much at first. Men like that never do. A small loan to secure a business permit. A short-term bridge to cover a supplier. Invest with me, he said, voice low, hand over hers. I could have walked up to her outside the cafe where they sat and said his full name. I could have said the city where he changed it last year. I could have told her about the woman who sold her gold to pay for his permit. But I have learned that knowledge thrown at pride does not become wisdom. It becomes noise. So I walked past them with a sack of flour on my shoulder and a smile that said I did not know how to count. I let her hand him the money. I let him promise to repay it by Friday. Then Friday came and went. Saturday too. By Sunday his phone rang twice and then died. Her eyes were swollen on Monday morning. On Tuesday she told her friends she had ended something that wasn't good for her. On Wednesday she posted a photo of a new handbag. The caption said self-love. The fourth crack was a contractor for her house renovation. She wanted marble. She wanted imported fittings that shine even in the dark. She hired a man with a company name embroidered on his shirt. He showed her samples and promised speed. I met him in the lane as he measured her front wall. He looked at me the way young dogs look at old dogs, mocking first, then careful. I asked him whether he planned to lay a moisture barrier under the new tiles. He blinked. Of course, he said, then asked what a barrier was. I smiled and offered him a cigarette. He took it like a gift from a father. Kareem helped me look at the contractor's papers. 3 lawsuits slept under his name like snakes under heat lamps. He was good at starting work, better at not finishing it. I did not say a word to the woman whose house I had once painted with a brush we shared. I waited. The workers tore out her old flooring. They left the rooms bare. Then they stopped coming. A supplier demanded payment, as per agreement, for material never delivered. The contractor's office phones rang into empty rooms. My daughter styled her hair and went to shout at a door that did not open. Each time, she made the same mistake. She hid the loss. She smiled harder. She bought louder things. Then she chased something new that promised to fix the old. Pride sells you a ladder while it digs the hole deeper. I did not pull her into these traps with my hands. I only stood where I used to stand when she was small, just behind her, letting her choose her steps. But now, my silence was a mirror. It showed her the person she had decided I was: harmless, empty, irrelevant. A man like that cannot warn you. A man like that cannot see far. So she did not look back. The 5th crack did not break her money. It broke her circle. After the police visit, some of her friends caught the scent of risk. They still came for the drinks. They still used her car for photos, but they stopped signing their names next to hers. One evening, an argument exploded in her living room over a bill left unpaid at a club. 2 women who called each other sisters pulled each other's hair while a man filmed with his phone and smiled. My wife stood by the doorway, hands clenched, face pale. When she told me later, her voice was tired, not angry. They are not our people, she said. I nodded, and in that single nod we were husband and wife again for a breath. The 6th crack was a tax notice. It arrived folded and official, stamped and cold. There were questions about sources, about declarations, about numbers that danced too fast on her statements. Kareem had warned me this day would come. Money that shouts attracts ears that listen for a living. She carried the letter to the party as if it were a clutch purse. She pretended it was a leaf she could crush in her fist. Paper is not a leaf. Paper cuts. By then, my ally Rafiq had collected a book of whispers. Shopkeepers who said she paid deposits and never checked receipts. A jeweler who kept 2 bracelets aside because he knew she would forget one. A driver who added miles to the log because she never looked. Little thieves grow under the shade of big pride. They nibble until the branch is hollow. I used none of this to hurt her with a blow. I sent a copy of that contractor's past cases to the city board. I gave the tax office a tip about the investment company using fake addresses. Information Karim gathered legally, piece by patient piece. I asked Hamid to gently ask again, in front of guests, about the money she had promised to return him. He did not accuse her. He asked about dignity. People remember questions longer than they remember answers. And I went to the widow at the bakery. I tasted the bread we now baked together. Steam rising, crust singing as it cracked. I asked her about hiring 2 boys who needed work. I did not need the help. I needed to remember that building is stronger than breaking. Even a net is made by joining threads, not cutting them. My daughter started selling things quietly. A ring. A second car that did not fit down our lane. She sold them while posting photos of sunlight on her coffee. Of curtains she called linen. Of shoes she called limited. I recognized the look in her eyes. I have seen it in men who pretend their injuries are scratches. Blood under a sleeve is still blood. Some night she drove past my window without seeing me. The car slowed at the corner, then sped up, as if she had almost turned and then remembered who I was. Once the car stopped, the engine idled. I could feel the vibration through the air. I sat on my cot and did not move. After a long minute, the engine sighed and the car rolled away. The charming man did not return. The broker sent a lawyer's letter that said nothing. The digital asset people deleted their channel and started a new one with a new name and a new promise. The contractor took a contract 2 cities away, and the tax office stamped a second notice. Her world did not collapse in one scream. It sank like wet wood. It made a sound only those who listen can hear. I listened. I heard the nails loosen. I heard the beams creak. I heard the water rise. And through it all, I stayed very small. I wore the same shirt. I bought the same tea. I sat in the same place at the same time so that when she looked up, if she ever did, she would find exactly what she expected to find. An old man with nothing. But I had something. I had patience. I had a net of friends who believed in quiet justice. I had a little bakery that filled the air with a smell that reminded me I was human. I had a wife who began to sit again on our mat in the evening, not to speak, but to be near. And I had the strength to stay silent in a new way, not the silence that surrenders, the silence that guides. The collapse began with the weight of her own steps. I placed the mirrors where she would see herself only if she looked back. She did not look back. That is how pride walks forward. Forward, forward, until the ground is gone. One night, as clouds piled over the city and a dry wind rattled the leaves, I walked past her house. The lights were on in only one room. No music. No cars. I stood under the tree and watched a shadow move across the window. She was on the phone, pacing, stabbing the air with her free hand, face turned away from the light. I could not hear the words. I did not need to. I knew that tone. I have used it when the numbers do not add, when the foreman does not pay, when the last coin rolls to the edge of the table and drops. I put my hand on the tree's rough bark and closed my eyes for a moment. I did not bless her. I did not curse her. I simply stood, feeling the wind on my face, listening to the song of money die down to a single thin note. Then I opened my eyes and went home. I slept well that night. Not because she was in pain. Pain is not food. I slept because the truth had begun to speak for itself. Because the world she made by pushing me away was finally telling her what I could not say without becoming the man she believed I was. In the morning, I washed my face and swept the floor. I checked the small box under the board. The coins were there. The papers for the bakery were there. Harem had sent a note with a single line. The board has opened a file. Rafiq had left a packet of spices by my door with a scrap of paper inside. Her driver is asking for 2 months' salary. Hamid had written that he would not ask again. He would wait at a wedding next month, where people notice who pays their debts. I tucked these notes away and stepped into the day. The sky was the color of old steel. The wind smelled like rain that might not come. I walked past the house that used to be louder than the street and heard only footsteps inside, back and forth, back and forth. I kept walking. Money makes a sound when it moves. It also makes a sound when it stops. It is a small sound, almost nothing. A click, a sigh, a door that does not quite close. I heard that sound behind me as I turned the corner. I did not look back. I did not need to. The day of her fall did not arrive with warning. It crashed into her life like a storm without clouds. Sudden and merciless. I was sweeping the narrow lane outside my small room when I heard the first raised voices. At first I thought it was the usual morning quarrel between shopkeepers. But the sound grew louder, engines revving, boots striking pavement, papers flapping in the air. I lifted my head and saw them. A convoy of dark cars rolled into the street. Men in stiff suits stepped out, carrying files, briefcases, and an air of finality. Behind them came tow trucks, their heavy chains clinking like shackles. They headed straight for her house. Her mansion, once the jewel of the neighborhood, now looked fragile against their march. Neighbors poured into the street, drawn like moths to a flame. Curtains twitched, children pointed. The air buzzed with curiosity and hunger for spectacle. I leaned on my broom and watched. Not close enough to be noticed, but close enough to see. The men spread out across her driveway, reading papers in sharp voices. Repossession order. Outstanding debt. Freeze of assets. Their words carried, cutting through the crowd. Then the tow trucks moved forward. One hooked onto her silver car, the car that once gleamed like pride itself. Another clamped her black SUV, the same one she used to drive past me without a glance. The sound of metal chains biting into her fortune filled the air. The front door burst open. She appeared, her face pale beneath her makeup. She shouted, waving her arms, her voice high and desperate. "This is a mistake. I paid everything. You can't take my cars." But the men ignored her. They had heard it all before. The papers in their hands were stronger than her words. The crowd murmured, voices rising with every moment. "So it's true," one woman whispered loudly enough for all to hear. "She owes more than she owned," another added. "We knew it wouldn't last. Easy money never does." I remembered those same mouths when they once whispered about her cars, her parties, her golden gowns. Envy had turned into gossip, and gossip had turned into venom. They spoke now with satisfaction, like wolves circling a wounded deer. She turned to her so-called friends, the ones who had arrived that morning, still hoping for food and drink. But they slipped away into the crowd, eyes lowered, unwilling to be seen at her side. She reached out, her hand trembling, but caught only air. Her screams grew sharper. She pleaded, she cursed, she threatened. None of it mattered. The officers moved past her into the house. Within minutes, they emerged with lists of seized items, furniture, jewelry, electronics. Her world was being stripped piece by piece, in front of the same neighbors she once dazzled. I stood still, my broom resting against the wall, and I thought of the night she pushed away my flowers in that restaurant. I thought of her voice cutting me down, telling me I was nothing. I felt the echo of that humiliation rise in my chest. But this time I did not flinch. I did not cry, I simply watched. She collapsed onto the steps of her mansion, her gown crumpling against the stone. The sound of chains clanking as her cars were dragged away was louder than her sobs. The crowd watched with hungry eyes, phones came out, flashes sparked. Soon her shame would travel beyond these streets, carried on screens, whispered in markets, laughed about in distant houses. The humiliation she had given me in a single hour was now returning to her, multiplied, carved into the memory of everyone who saw it. My wife stood beside me. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes flickered with something between pity and understanding. For the first time in months, she leaned slightly closer to me, as though the distance between us had shrunk. "Do you feel proud now?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of my answer. I shook my head. "No pride. Only silence. Justice does not need my joy."